Okay, so our 1 unit test passed. I'm going to write another unit test to test my privacy method. So it'll be a really similar method. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this for a minute. So this one, I'll just rename the test to privacy view loads. This time, instead of calling the index method, we're going to call privacy. And we're going to test that we get back a view called privacy. So I just changed the 3 instances of the word index to privacy. So now we've got an unread test here. So I'm just going to run this one test. I'm just going to right click it and choose run selected. It's not going to bother running my index test.
Now, don't we have to change it in the controller too?
Well, let's see what happens with our test. So notice the test fails. And if I click on it down here in my test explorer, it says we expected a value of privacy, but we got null. So this is kind of silly, buggy behavior on Microsoft's part. When we run our web application, the return view statement knows to load a view called privacy. If we click the privacy link in our browser, it does actually work. Even though we haven't specified the name of the view, if I click privacy in my browser, it loads the view called privacy. For some strange reason, though, in my unit test, it doesn't know what the view is called. And when I click it, it says that there's no name, the view name is empty. So to fix this, to get our test to pass, we're going to have to explicitly put in the name of the view. Yes, Ken, is the long-winded answer to your question. So if we explicitly name the view in our return statement, I can now run this test again. And it should pass, which it does. Notice the code, the coverage color coding hasn't been updated. I actually have to run that tool again, which is annoying. So if I say analyze code coverage, it'll update this and this should go blue and our coverage should be up from 0.37% to something slightly higher. Right. We're up to 0.42 of 1% for the whole app. So if we go to controllers and home, so home is now up to about 10% covered. So privacy and index.
To get 100% coverage, you have to cover even like would you have to, is it looking to cover, say, like the public eye action result about parts of the code? Or?
I don't know in detail what it covers. I can't give you.
I have one line there that's just an open curly brace.
It doesn't cover, yeah, it ignores things like break. No, it's not. It's not counted, sorry. Oh, actually, I ran it again. I made a mistake running it. So I'm almost at 1% code coverage project-wide, but in my controller, we're now at 19%. So both index and privacy are 100% covered. If I turn the coverage on, privacy is now blue, index is blue, and it says privacy has 1 of 1 passing as well.
I'm not sure why if you get about and other covered, then it still doesn't appear to be adding to 100%.
Well, and that's partly why I'm not requiring you to get 100 in the assignment. You should get close.
Because at the rate that it's going up,
Josh? Yep. So it's exactly the same. I just replaced the instances of index with privacy. in 3 places. So the method name, sorry, the test method name, the method we're testing, and the expected result. Those 3 places we had index, now we've got privacy. So probably not super complicated so far, I imagine. Probably not that different from what you did with JUnit, maybe, kind of, sort of.
Quite different.
Quite different?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the other things we
Same
didn't,
sort of idea. Execution.
okay,
We're doing it on like different, way different. methods.
right, Gifford?
I mean, I feel like the answer is fine. For the assert.r equal, do we ever get anything like more complex than like 3 lines for our JUnit? Like here we've got like, here's the, like, that basically what we have there, like, I understand it's gonna be just setting up and saying it's equal, but like, the one thing, does it ever get more complex in your JUnit? Along the way?
It will. The asserts won't be a lot more complicated. We also have a collection assert. So we want to check 2 lists are equal. We can compare them, for example, and we're going to need to do that shortly. We may have more. A lot of the work is typically in the arrange because we've got to instantiate objects, set up variables in order to create a particular scenario we want to test. So the arrange gets more complicated. We also have a built-in, we didn't use here. So we've repeated this twice, right? Each test, we've instantiated the same controller object. MS test comes with the test initialize method that is automatically called before every individual test. So we could make home controller a global variable, and we could instantiate it in test initialize. That way we wouldn't need the arrange statements here at all, because test initialize would handle the arrange at a class level. Now we may still have individual things we need to arrange for a particular test, but we'll use that test initialize in a minute. So that saves us a bit of coding. So let's go ahead and create a second test class. So I'm going to right click my lowballers test project. I'm going to add, I'm just going to add a new item. And if I go to code, I don't even actually see my unit test class. That's fine. We can just create it as a generic class if it's not in here somewhere. All right, so I'll just pick class. I don't want an SQL server unit test, but fill your boots. So I'm going to call this one products controller test. So this is just a generic class, so we need to convert it to a unit testing class. First thing I will do is go back to my home controller, and I'm going to grab those 3 dependencies at the top. We're going to need all of them. So just copy them from the home controller. We can overwrite the unused references. We're also going to add this test class annotation. To start, just for fun, woohoo, let's copy the index method from the home controller, and we'll try to call the index method in the products controller. So I'll just grab my first test method called index view loads. And I'm just going to change the arrange statement. Instead of invoking the home controller, we're going to invoke the products controller. And again, we'll call the index method, and it should return a view called index. Now, why does this work in the home controller test and not work here? What is happening? There's no argument that corresponds to the parameter context in our constructor. Here's our friend dependency injection again. We didn't get this error for the home controller, but we've got it for the product controller. So let's have a look at those two files. Here's our home controller. Our home controller, in fact, has no constructor at all. We can just instantiate it. Our products controller, which we scaffolded, here's our friend dependency injection. What kind of object does this controller require be passed to it or injected to it before you can instantiate an instance? DB context. You can't create this class without the DB context. How does it get the DB context? That happens here in our startup. This basically adds an instance automatically to our controllers. Well, if we anyone we scaffold, yeah, all we had to do was scaffold it and it works, right? We didn't have to add the passing. It's in the constructor.
But I mean, where you just were at, like, we didn't see it constructing all, like, what piece of the code here says, let's instantiate a bunch of controllers and give them the DB context? You know what I mean?
That's startup.cs, right?
Yeah, this is startup.cs.
So I believe everything in there is one gigantic constructor.
Yeah, it's adding it to the services. So in configure, so this runs on startup. So any controller that takes that DB context as a dependency has access to it automatically. The problem is we're now trying to instantiate our controller from a unit test. So that startup file, it doesn't run. And we don't want it to connect to our SQL server because then it's an integration test. We're trying to test this method independently of the database. We want to call the index method and make sure it returns a view called index. The problem is we now have the database in the way. So this is where we need some kind of mock data instead. So traditionally what we did was we used this package, which I think is mentioned in that Microsoft article, called mock. It allowed us to kind of create fake data, and we would pass a mock object instead of a DB context object. With .NET Core, it now actually has a built-in way of mocking the data in memory. We don't have to use mock, which is a third-party dependency anymore. They've built this into .NET Core. So we need to make a couple of new references here. What do we need? So in our lowballers, I'm going to go back and add a couple dependencies. So I'm going to go back to manage my NuGet packages. We're going to need to make a reference in the lowballers test project. So right-click lowballers test, manage NuGet packages. Because the references we need, we already have them in the web project. So the first thing we need is we need Entity Framework Core. We're going to create an in-memory mock-up of a database, but it's not actually going to connect to our real database. We're faking it. So in here, we want Entity Framework Core. If we search, I don't want version 3. We've got version, so I want any of the version 2.2s. I think we use 2.2.6 in the web project. I'll use the same version here. So install Microsoft.Entity Framework Core 2.2.6. And then we're also going to want this package. Actually, I think the Entity Framework Core is a dependency of the Entity Framework Core in memory. So I think if we just install the Entity Framework Core in memory, it should also install Entity Framework Core. So I'm going to install 2.2.6 of this one first. It should give us the other one. So we want Microsoft.EntityFramework.Core.InMemory. In-memory database provider for Entity Framework Core to be used for testing. That is exactly the scenario we're in. So let's install that. Oh, for Axo cover? Yes. Okay, hang on. I can do that now. So I think that installs both. Yes, it installs the core and it installs in memory. So we need. Okay, no, I'm kind of going to come to your question. Okay, hang on. As I said, I do not multitask. So I'm just going to comment this out because I can't run my test. You can't run unit tests if your project won't compile. So I'm just going to temporarily comment out this test because we're going to still need to deal with the dependency injection. So to run it, if you go to Tools and Axo Cover, it's now here under the Tools menu. So it's a similar kind of window. And if I click Tests, what's going on? Found new unit tests or open an existing coverage report. What is going on with this extension? Let's see. So here's their code coverage tool. I do not know why this is not recognizing my unit tests. So Noah, yours is the same. There's no option to run the tests.
I have the same.
.NET Core projects not supported. Okay, we need another extension. So we'll go back to online. .NET Core test. See what we come up with.
First one that comes up is the.
Yeah. I didn't realize Axo Cover wouldn't work for .NET Core. We'll have to use our Google Foo and see what we should use. I'm not sure.
May not even be. Yes, you can. I don't. You can imagine it's quite complex.
Okay. So now I'm going to put this stuff back. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an instance of my lowballers context. Now it doesn't know what lowballers context is because it's in the models namespace, so we need to reference the models. Now it recognizes our database class. I realize you can't run the test. Just do your best to follow along for now. We'll try and figure out. I sure hope not. So that's our first thing. We're also going to let's create our products controller here. Our product. Oh, sorry. So we'll create, rather than instantiate the controller over and over again in all our methods, we'll just declare it globally in the class. And all the methods can use this one object. And then we can add a test initialize method. So this will run automatically. So we don't have to call it. It automatically runs before every unit test. So any setup code we want to have happen globally, we can put it in here. So we'll just instantiate we still have our dependency injection problem, but I can actually take out the arrange statement here. We don't need to arrange anything anymore. The arrange will happen in our initialize method. That's a keyword. So this decorator, by adding, I'll put in a note here. So adding this annotation automatically runs this method before every test. So if we've got startup, so every test we have here, we're going to write like 20 tests. Every one of them is going to initialize an instance of the products controller. So we'll put that in test initialize rather than repeating the same arrange statement 20 times. But that's what that decorator will do. It'll run automatically. So what we need to do is now create in-memory context and inject to controller instance. So we're going to set up the options, which is a new DB context options builder using the low ballers context. Visual Studio doesn't know what to make of DB context options builder. We just are missing a reference to Entity Framework Core. So we'll just accept the reference here. Now we already have this line in our startup file. I'm just going to go to the startup file for a second so you can see how it compares. So here we add the low ballers context with the option use SQL Server and get our default connection string. We don't want to use the default connection string. We don't even have a connection string in the test project. Connection string's only for the web project. And we don't want to use SQL Server. We want to use an in-memory database instead. We have to give it a name. We're just going to randomly name it with a GUID. Just give it a random ID. We don't care what the database is called. It's just in memory while we're unit testing. You could name it however you want. So we need to reference the system class to get a GUID. And what's going on here?
You go back to the startup.cs, there's like a little bit like a lambda expression, brackets for
I think it's just a syntax. Oh, new DB context options builder. And then whoops, then we just attach the options. I'll fix that in a minute. So then we instantiate our object with the options. And then we should be able to pass it to our controller. So that we can now call the constructor. I know we still have a few issues here. But now we can inject that dependency to our controller. So our controller's still getting an instance of the database connection class, but it's using an in-memory copy that we're randomly naming. It's not actually attached to SQL Server. We're close. What's going on here?
Feeling like the lambda expression might be, because it was very, very clearly a lambda expression here.
Well, let's see. Well, because the options were declared in one line of code, here we're creating the options object and then attaching it. Yeah, it doesn't know what GUID is, so you need to make a reference to system. Pardon, Josh? Well, the class is lowercase. My DB context. Oh, well, yes. No, because my variable is called lowercase options. Ah, I love this error. It cannot convert DB context to an object of type DB context, even though they're the same. It's the same. I love that. Let's see. What are we missing? We've got controllers, models, and core, MVC, unit testing, and system. We need all those. Controllers, models, MVC, identity framework, core.
Cannot convert from DB context options builder to Microsoft framework core.db context options. So
Cannot.
the options is what you're creating there is an options, but it's like you're trying to create an options builder, but what it needs is options.
But I have options here. So it wants my context.
Yeah, mine says it's okay now.
And is yours the same as mine?
The only thing I can't see is includes.
Okay, let's see. What if we...
Now it doesn't like this.
So I can create a new instance, but I do need to attach those options. Otherwise, it's not going to know to use an in-memory database.
Are you including your models?
Yep. Because otherwise, it wouldn't have recognized this class at all. We're close. Let's see what's in startup. Add DB context.
What that means, I have no idea.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna try to sort this one out first. It says we need a reference to entity framework core. Ah, okay. This might be why. Okay. Now it wants me to make a reference.
You have a mismatch.
Well, maybe it wants the identity.
Oh,
I'm
yes,
injecting
yours is
the whole,
ident-
like,
Yours is an identity, mine's not. That's how
Right.
mine's work.
Okay. So if I add that,
Isn't it crashing on the authentication part that we added to it?
That's why his isn't working and mine is, because mine doesn't have that identity option on that context.
You don't have authentication.
I could not get it to take. I could not get it to work without.
Mind you, it won't.
on the
So I may have to install identity as a dependency. I don't know. We'll try it.
I tried. I could not, for some reason, it just would not work. Take my identity. It would not work with my context as an identity.
Let's see. What's it asking for? ASP.NET Core. ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core.
That's identity framework.
Right. This one. I think I just scrolled past it. Identity Entity Framework Core. I'll try 2.2.0.
Yeah, I just added that and it fixed it. I don't know if it fixed it correctly, but.
Now mine's gonna be a problem with returning an index because cannot convert system.writing.task.text.
Okay. Okay, so there's my setup. We needed to add identity.entity framework core. And the code I had is correct. So we're injecting our context. And down here, this needs to be a lowercase p.
Yes.
Okay, so again, we need a reference here. Oh, I think if we just use threading, if we make a reference to system.threading.tasks, that should go away. I don't know why it's not suggesting that. Usually it mentions the references properly. Oh, the issue is our method returns an I-action result. I can't convert that directly.
Well, let's just capture it without casting it and then
If you
inspect
cast
it
it
and
as
see
an
if we
I-action
can,
result, it
with the
works.
break.
That's a good idea. So we want it, okay, because it's an asynchronous, it's returning I-action result.
If you do an I-action result, it gets rid of that. If you cast it as an I-action.
Okay, we can try that. We shouldn't even need to cast it because it is an I-action result.
Yeah, you just, the bar would be.
So the issue here is then we don't have access. All right, well, let's try it first. Let's just assert that it's not null and we can inspect what that result object is. So we'll just assert that result is not null. We'll try this. So if I just want to run this one test, I can just right click it and say run test. Yeah, why did it not run my test?
Yeah, but
So why? Oh, why won't it run my tests? Let's see. I'm going to rebuild my solution. We have it as a test class. So we've got test class and test method.
Unit testing include?
Oh, that is one of the neat things they now have is live unit testing. So as you save methods, it'll rerun the unit tests automatically. You can turn that on. Maybe I'm going to try that because this Test Explorer is not working very well. I'm going to go to test and live unit testing.
no tests found to run.
Well, I think we set this up the way I wanted to. If I say run, not run tests. Okay, I'm going to restart Visual Studio. I'm going to stop the stream and try to figure out why this is not being recognized. Obviously, we have a unit test here. I've tried. Why is this excluded from live unit testing? Okay, I'll have to poke around with it for a bit.